So good evening. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm so happy tonight to be able to present to you Father Greg Boyle to talk to us about his magnificent ministry in Homeboy Industries. So we have people from everywhere, and that's a great tribute to Father Greg. People who have worked with him, people who have volunteered, people who have traveled with him, people who have heard about him, and our own parishioners who for a long time have been talking about, let's get Father Greg Boyle, especially people like Nancy and Gary. I just want to say it's a privilege for us to have Father Greg tonight. Just to place this in context for you, one of the things we have been trying to do as a parish over the last year or two is to have some speakers or some major events that brings together our community and brings also people who are not regular parts of our community but who enjoy what we have. And we have speakers. We've had of course Michael Colopy with us over the last year, who delighted us with his pictures and his photos and his stories about all the people he had photographed. And so we were delighted to have him. And so tonight, Greg is the highlight, and so we are so glad that he's with us. He has, you know, published many books, 4, I think. The most recent, and we talked about it tonight, and just to remind him of the name of it again, it is called Cherished Belonging, the Healing Power of in a Divided Time. You are, I think, all familiar with Tattoos on the Heart, which I think was his first and perhaps the book that really got his name out there so much in so many parts of the country and indeed of the world. He has brought with him tonight 2 people. He's brought who has he brought? He's brought Jose and he's brought Jose and Joey. So we are going to start, but let me just, you know about Greg. Most of you know Greg, and he's a Jesuit, and you know his work, his magnificent work, and he will tell us more about his work. But we're going to start tonight by Jose Jimenez, who is going to start with us and share with us some thoughts. Welcome, Jose.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Well, my name's Jose. I've been at Homeboys for about going on about 3 years. But here's a little background on myself. So I came to Homeboys seeking help, you know, because I was struggling with addiction, living the street life, which it was pretty complicated. At the age of 9, I started doing, that's when I started with drugs and became heavily involved with gangs. And, you know, I lived that life for a long time. I was struggling with addiction for about 21 years. So once my 3rd child was about to be born, I told myself, like, I can't do this no more, you know. So I went and asked for help, and that's when I went into Homeboys, where I was welcomed with open arms, you know. I showed up to a place where I knew that I felt welcomed. So I joined the 18-month program. I completed the program. I applied for a position there at Homeboys, which now I'm a supervisor at the Electronic Recycling Center. I got about 3.5 years clean and sober from all substances, alcohol. you guys. Right now it's just a little, I feel like very important right now, and this is very special to me because I do have my son here with me. That's probably what's making me feel the way I'm feeling right now, But it's okay though, because I need my son to hear my story. He's seen part of it. He's seen part of what I was struggling, but I just want him to understand my full story. Like the way I was, from where I was to where I'm at now. I love helping people because that's what was given to me. The help that I needed. So, I work with all kinds of different people. People that are still struggling with addiction, people that are still into like the street life, which hopefully they could see it sooner than later that it's not the life that you want to live. For me, my journey right now is just to keep moving forward, just so my kids understand like there's nothing in that life. Man, I got this. Sorry about that. But what more can I say? To be honored, be blessed to be here. To give you guys a little insight of my life. Life's been a struggle. Before coming into Homeboys, I've always heard about Homeboys. Go to Homeboys. Like, nah. That's not for me. But yeah, I'm glad I did make that choice to step into Homeboys, to become part of the program, because it's a community of kinship. As soon as you walk into the doors, you feel the love, you feel the need to want to be there, and being able to change is what's really special about Homeboys. Father G, I give it to him because he's dealt with a lot of people, like helped a lot of people, and that's one thing I can always say is whenever somebody brings up Father G, it's nothing but love and respect. And, I just want to thank this man from the bottom of my heart, to be able to come up here to talk to you guys, give it, once again, a little bit about my story. It's an honor to have my son here. But, this is one of the best feelings that I could say that I'm going through today, I was excited about the trip because life's been a little tough, but, being able to wake up, every day is a blessing. And I'm not only doing it for myself, but I'm doing it for my kids, because for a long time I was absent from their life. And that was due to my addiction. And today it's a real honor and a blessing to be able to bring my son out with me to do this. So, man, I don't know where I would be today, but, I'm in a blessed place, Yeah, I'm in a blessed place, and it's one of the best feelings that I've ever felt. Like, sorry guys, I'm not used to this. But I really. It's an honor to be here, I know I keep saying it because that's what I truly feel. And, just want to thank you guys all for taking the time out of your night to be here. And that's really all I got to say, guys. I appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind hospitality. It's great to be here with so many amazing friends, and it's the privilege of my life to have traveled here with Jose and Joey. Joey had never been on a plane before, so be sure to ask him all about it later on. He's not one bit shy. Well, gosh, so many of you have heard me speak before, so I was inviting several of you to give this talk in my place, but it happens. You know, I remember I was invited years ago to speak to a foster grandparent gathering in Orange County, huge gathering of foster grandparents. And well, the following summer, they said, could you come back and speak? And I go, gosh, I just spoke last summer, you know, and I said yes, you know, and so I went to the talk, and afterwards this foster grandmother came up to me, and she had big tears in her eyes, and I think she liked the talk, and she grabbed both my hands and she said, I heard you last year. It never gets better. So kind of hoping she misspoke there. Anyway, you know, I was walking this morning in San Francisco before the sun came up, and I was thinking about, you know, you gather in a church like this on an evening like this because you want to be quickened to something. You know, it's not about me, and it's not even about my message. It's about a longing to be quickened to something. And it's what we all hope for. What Martin Luther King says about church could well be said about your time here this evening. It's not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from. And you go from here and you want something to happen, which is what you want to be quickened to. You go from here and you want to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. What Jose mentioned in terms of walking in, and it's a place where you feel welcomed and acknowledged and seen. And so this is not the place you've come to, it's the place you will go from. And you go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. You go from here to really roll up your sleeves and be quickened to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And you go from here and you know somehow that you will have to stand at the margins, because that's the only way they'll ever get erased, is if we stand out at them. And we stand with a particularity. We stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and we get to stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And we go from here, and wow, what a privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. We will get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. We want to be quickened to that. That's where our longing is. To live as though the truth were true, and to put first things recognizably first. We want to live the marrow of the gospel and adhere closely to it. And we brace ourselves as we go from here, because the truth be told, the world will accuse you of wasting your time at the margins. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." You will go from here and other voices will get heard because of you. The truth of the matter is, none of that makes any damn sense unless it's aligned to a sense of God that's quite large and spacious. Because sometimes we settle for a partial God when we should hold out for the God we actually have, the expansive, generous God. St. Ignatius of Loyola always talked about the God who is always greater. Just when you think you've landed on a notion of God, it's always greater than that. Meister Eckhart, who's a mystic and a theologian, used to say, it is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. We're about to enter the time, or we have entered the time of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. We don't really fully believe that that's kind of God's dream come true, is for us to be in community, in kinship with each other, comfort and joy, soothing each other, which is our call. But we project onto God a kind of a puniness sometimes, and it forces us to be tiny. Anne Lamott always says, you know you've created God in your own image when God hates the same people you do, you know. We want to avoid that if we can, you know. True enough, we're all created in the image and likeness of God, but Richard Rohr says our image of God also creates us, so we want to be attentive to our image. So for 40 years I've walked with gang members, and it's the privilege of my life to know people like Jose. And the day won't ever come, ever, 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 when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than he is. But during those 40 years, I would always say Mass at juvenile hall and probation camps and jails, and on a rotating basis all the time. I was just at San Fernando Juvenile Hall on Sunday. And many years ago, I said Mass there in the gym, and there were like 100 gang members there on folding chairs in front, and there was a raised platform. And I was wearing my album, my stole, and the homies would get up and do the readings. And they had these sheets that had the readings in English and in Spanish. And I thought, well, I'm going to just close this little sheet thing, this little booklet, and I let it rest on my lap, and I closed my eyes, and I listened to the word proclaimed. And the first guy got up and did the reading from the Hebrew Bible, and then the second guy got up to do the responsorial psalm. And I don't know, there was a kind of a overabundance of confidence in his voice. And he gets up and he says, the Lord is exhausted. And I look at the sheet, I said, what the hell? And it was, the Lord is exalted. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Because if we were God, we would want to be exalted. I think that's kind of the truth. But the exhausted God is closer. It's more about generosity, about giving of oneself and finding the joy there is in that kind of giving. And I think that's better. That's a better image. Because everybody knows what it's like, come Monday morning, somebody asks you, how was your weekend? And you go, I'm pooped. I had the grandkids the whole weekend. And you understand what that is. It's a good tired, where you're lost in a generosity that's akin to how our God sees us. And that's important, because our notion of God will guide us. So I was on a Zoom with my 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and they're all married, so they're all the couples on this huge screen that we've been doing since COVID. And it was it would have been my mom's 100th birthday. And she died some years ago at 92. And my father died like 30 years ago. And so my mom died the way, you want to die, in your own bed, in your own home, surrounded by your kids. And she was sharp as a tack even to the end. In fact, the last year of her life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow. And she wasn't a lick afraid of dying. I can remember like a month before she died, she was just giddy and she was exhilarated. And she said to me, "I've never done this before," and like it's something you say just before skydiving, and in fact, the day before she died, I was sitting at the foot of her bed and nobody was in the room, which never happened. And she was asleep. And she woke up and she saw me sitting there at the foot of her bed. And she said, "Oh, for crying out loud." And she went back to sleep. Well, she was pissed that she hadn't died yet, and I'm sorry. And then the next day, as luck would have it again, it was around noon. And I was sitting at the foot of her bed again, and nobody was there. I think my sisters had gone out to retrieve lunch or something. And at exactly noon, she opened her eyes, and she lifted her head from the pillow, and she let out this wondrous, glorious gasp. Skydiving. And she left us. And nobody in earshot of that sound could ever be afraid of death again. And I remember that towards the end of her life, she'd be in and out of consciousness. There'd be 2 or 4, all 8 of her kids or grandkids around her bed, and she'd be in and out. But when she came to, she would lock on to just one of us, and she would laser beam focus on this one person. And she would say with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And I remembered that when we buried her, I thought, that may well be the singular agenda of our exhausted God, is to look at you with breathless delight and say, "You're here. You're here." In fact, I think of Jesus in the desert, 40 days and 40 nights, and we have a notion of what that experience was like for him. And of course, that 40 days and 40 nights is a precursor to our Lent, which always reminds me of Michelle Nunez, a homegirl who worked at Homeboy, who a tough cookie, grew up in the projects, and she came into my office one day and she goes, "Well, it's official. I just found out my man's been cheating on me." I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry to hear that." "I don't sweat it. I just went to church, got me them ashes, gave his ass up for Lent." That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but I can't say the word Lent and not tell you about Michelle. Do I need another microphone? Or are we okay? There we go. It's starting to buzz. But anyway, I digress. So there's Jesus in his in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. And we have this notion that it's grumbling stomach and dark night of the soul and, doubts. When I suspect that it was mainly just Jesus knowing the God of love, looking at him and saying with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And so we receive the tender glance, and then we choose to be that tender glance in the world. We notice the notice of God, then we choose to be that notice in the world. And we practice the presence of God in the world. And so that we stand at the margins and we choose to be in the world who God is, loving, compassionate, and kind. So Homeboy was born a long time ago, during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city, Dolores Mission. It was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was comprised of these two housing projects, the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, which is quite untypical of housing projects to have that many. The LAPD called my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in the whole city. So if Los Angeles was the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988. 3 months ago, I buried my 263rd. Not all from that parish, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school. We have Eric DeBode here, who was one of our first faculty members. That was a long time ago. And because we had so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school, nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the projects in the middle of the day. You know, they were selling drugs, they were writing on walls, they were violent. So I would walk out to them and I'd kind of isolate them one at a time. And I said, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And each one said, yeah, you know, I would. And then, you know, I couldn't find a school that would take them, you know, so that forced my hand a little bit. And right across the street from the church was our parochial school, Dolores Mission Elementary. And it was a 3-story building. The first 2 floors were grades K to 8. Third floor was the convent. And so one evening I sat all the nuns down in their living room and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And I remember they looked at each other and they said, sure, you know, and that was the entirety of their discernment process. And then we were off and running, and gang members came in large numbers to the school. It was a tough place. We'd have brawls, like 3 big old brawls a day, because kids came from all 8 of the gangs. And teachers didn't last long. I had a principal who lasted exactly 1 day. I called him the next day to see where the hell he was, and he had changed his number and apparently checked into a witness protection program. But the homies came, you know, and which created something of a disconnect in the parish, you know. Parishioners would come up to me and they'd say, you know, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? You know, good people in and bad people out. So that was a good gospel challenge. And in no time, the gang members said, you know, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the parish, and the profile of those who lived in the projects were women with children. There weren't a lot of men. Myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we had to start stuff. You know, we couldn't wait. And so we started a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of members of the rival 8 gangs in the projects. Then, those of you old enough to remember this, 1992, the last day of April, after the acquittal of the 4 police officers who beat down Rodney King, every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles erupted, except the poorest pocket, my parish. And So the LA Times came snooping around like the next day and wanted to know why this was the case in my parish. And so they asked me, and I said, well, I'm not entirely sure, except that, we do have 60 strategically hired rival gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the next day the article appeared. The following day, I'm summoned to the Beverly Hills office of a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million. And his first question to me when I walked into his office was, how should I spend my money? And as I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request, I was young, I had hair. I said, well, there's a bakery across the street from the school. You could buy it. That has ovens. They don't work, but, you could fix them. And we could put hair nets on rival enemy gang members, and they could bake bread. And he said, sure. And so we were off and running. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from what we previously called ourselves, Jobs for a Future, to Homeboy Industries. And nobody ever intends to do something like this, but we backed our way, we evolved our way into now becoming the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So 10,000 folks from all over walk through our doors every year. Everyone who walks through our doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. Every single man and woman who walks through there comes with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening. And you can't really calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so we greet people, as Jose was mentioning. And they walk through the doors and people feel safe and seen and then cherished. They walk through the doors and someone will lock eyes on to them, and their whole being will say, you're here. You're here. Homies, especially those who've been locked up for many years, will say, we're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And if it's true that the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. I remember back in the day when I would ride my bike in the housing projects late at night, and I patrol all the 8 gangs wherever they, where they kicked it, and just kind of see how they were doing. I remember this one gang, and there were older homies who would kind of come up to the front when I pull up on straddling my black beach cruiser. And then there was always this little guy who would always work his way through the group. I found out his name was Danny, and he was only 13 years old. And he would always kind of lift his shirt to reveal that he had a gun tucked into the front of his pants. I don't know why he wanted me to know this, but he did. And he made a solemn vow to me one night. I remember he said, I will never step foot in Homeboy Industries. And I go, So I never knew him at Homeboy. I knew him in the streets. I knew him in that alley. I knew him at juvenile hall and then probation camp, detention facilities. Finally, at 18, he goes to prison for 2 years. And in all recovery, they say it takes what it takes. Gang recovery is the same. It can be the birth of a son, the death of a friend, a long stretch in prison. It takes what it takes. For Danny, he got out of prison after 2 years to find that his mother had 6 months to live. She had pancreatic cancer. And I watched this guy be so tender with him. He became kind of the designated hospice caregiver. It was all the more remarkable because she was quite less than tender with him. She was torturous, actually. And I went over one day and I anointed her and said a blessing prayer. And a week later, she died. And a week after that, I buried her. And a week after that, Danny walks into Homeboy for the very first time. And I watch him inhabit the truth of who he is. I watch him work side by side with guys I know he used to shoot at. I watch him get his GED, and I watch him, as we say at Homeboy, laugh from the stomach. And one day he comes into my office and he plunks himself down in a chair in front of my desk. And he very dramatically begins by saying, "What happened to me yesterday has never happened to me in my life." And he proceeds to tell me that after work one day at 5, he goes across the street to catch the red line heading east. And he said the train was packed, but he managed to get a seat. And he said, standing in front of him, holding onto a pole, he said was a medio pedo guy, a guy who was a little bit drunk. He could see tattoos on his hands, so he knew he was a gang member, but he didn't know him. He was an older guy. And Danny's wearing a sweatshirt that says Homeboy Industries, jobs, not jails. And the little bit drunk guy says, "You work there?" And Danny doesn't know whether to engage him exactly, so he nods. And the guy says, "Is it any good?" And Danny shrugs and he says, "Well, it's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'm going to go back to prison because of this place." So then Danny stands and he fishes a pen and a tiny piece of paper out of his pocket. And he stands in front of this guy and he carefully writes down the address at Homeboy Industries. And as he's telling me the story, he says, "I couldn't believe I knew the address by heart." And he finishes writing it and he sees this guy. And he hands the piece of paper to him and he says, "You come see us. We'll help you." And the guy sees Danny and he says, "Thank you." And the train stops and Danny gets off. And then Danny sits down. Now he returns to that earlier refrain. What happened to me next has never happened to me in my life. Everyone on the train was staring at me. Everyone on the train was nodding at me. Everyone on the train was smiling at me. And now he can barely continue. And for the first time in my life, I felt admired. And that's the sound of a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. Staring, nodding, smiling. At Homeboy, we're allergic to the idea of holding the bar up and asking homies to measure up. Mainly because our exhausted God never does this with us. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth. That they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then you watch them become that truth, inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that keep people from seeing their truth. Parentheses, I'm a Jesuit. You know, like Pope Francis. I'm just saying. But the homies don't know what a Jesuit is. So there are 3 of us who work there. But they don't really know what a Jesuit is. And I was sitting at my office behind my desk, and there were 2 homies in front. My office is glass enclosed if you've ever been there, and I can look out and see the whole reception area and those who walk through the door. And I was talking to these 2 homies, and we have like 8 tour groups a day from all over the world, small groups, large groups, and all of a sudden 20 people plant themselves right in front of my glass enclosed office for a tour. And it's one of those observe our founder in his natural habitat kinds of moments. And I wave faintly. And the tour guide is Osvaldo, who, what the homies would call, has a loud-ass voice. And he says, "This is Father Greg Boyle. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries. He is a jiu-jitsu priest." So from my desk, I do some of my more impressive moves. Anyway, I told you that to tell you this. On February 28, 1540, St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, enters this one word for the very first time in his spiritual diary or journal. And he proceeds to use it a lot for the remaining 12 years of his life. And before he dies, he goes back and he circles the word for all the times that he's used it. Now, I speak Spanish, but I never had heard this word before. And the word is acatamiento. Acatamiento. And it comes from a word acatar, which is kind of archaic a little bit, and it means to put your attention to something, look at something with attention. And it gets translated as affectionate awe. And though it was born of a mystical singular experience between Ignatius and the God of love, I think Ignatius wanted it to be something broader. I think he suggests it's a disposition or our stance at the margins when you go from this church beyond it. What's our disposition going to be there? Acatamiento, affectionate awe. And it reminds me, in the Acts of the Apostles, it has this one odd line that says, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all, including this one, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Acatamiento, affectionate awe. Well, many years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and it was what we used to call in those days a gang in-service. And I used to do a lot of these in the day. Social workers would commandeer a hotel ballroom and they'd sign in to get credits. And from 9 to 5, they'd hear keynotes and breakout sessions and workshops, all to understand the fact that no hopeful kid has ever joined a gang in the history of the world, and no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. And gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery. And misery loves company, as we all know. And so, you get up there and try to talk to social workers about how do we infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, and how do we help transform pain so homies don't have to keep inflicting it, and how do we deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. So I'd done this a lot, and I said yes. I bought my plane ticket to Richmond, Virginia, figuring I'd do a keynote or something. And so a week before I was to fly, this happens to me a lot, where I pull out the letter. What am I doing? And I discover as I read the letter that originally invited me, that apparently I hadn't read very well, it said that I was to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I told myself what the homies often say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I invited 2 trainees who were in our 18-month training program, Andre, an African-American gang member, and his enemy, Jose. And they were like in their 9th month of their 18 months. I sit them down in my office. I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I would like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I had never heard their stories before, and Jose gets up first, and he's like 25 years old at the time. And he was a gang member, shot caller, bigwig, went to prison, felon. During the 18 months, Jose completed his 18 months, and part of it is you're placed in a lot of different places. Tattoo removal, one of our 14 social enterprises aligned with the legal department, wellness team. And Jose kind of glommed onto the substance use disorder team, a man solid in his own recovery, and now he's helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So not only a shot caller, gang member, prisoner, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up in front of 600 social workers, and he tells his story. I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I mean, I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage, and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. And finally, my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 T-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. Acatamiento, affectionate awe. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. Let me just end with a last story, and then we'll do a little Q&A. It occurs sometimes, universities usually run by jujitsus, who will force their students to read my books against their will. And I'm not complaining, but Gonzaga University, many years ago, my alma mater in Spokane, who ruins my bracket every March, they forced their incoming freshman class to read Tattoos on the Heart. And they said, could you come and speak? And we're going to have a Tuesday night, huge venue, 1,000 people. And could you bring 2 homies with you? And I do if people ask, I usually normally pick homies in the same way. I always pick homies who are enemies with each other, just to force them to share a hotel room, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of watching gang members panicked in the sky. A number of years ago, I remember I was at LAX, we were flying somewhere, and one of the older homies I brought with me, he said, hey, gee, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yes, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So I picked these 2 guys, Larry, African-American, a gang member, and his enemy, Mario. And I've done this so many times, I have to admit that Joey was really quite brave. I give you credit for 15 years old. But the homies I'm used to nervous Nellies, but this guy, Mario, was just too much. And it was starting to freak me out, He was just so petrified, and he was hyperventilating, which I had never witnessed in my whole life. He's and we hadn't even, boarded the plane yet. And we were at Burbank Airport, as you know, is sort of a small-ish airport, but big planes, Southwest Airlines, big planes. And you don't board through that hermetically sealed chute to board the plane. You walk out into the tarmac like you're the president, and there's the steps that lead to the front of the plane. Big feature at Burbank are the steps that lead to the back of the plane. And Larry is out walking somewhere, exploring Burbank Airport, and I'm sitting there with Mario, and it's early morning. It's still kind of dark. It's the first flight of the day, and I see our flight crew arrives, and And there are two female flight attendants, both of them with very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the front steps to board the plane. And just then Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" And I said, "Well, as soon as they sober up the pilots." There they go now. Perhaps I should not have said that. I should tell you that in our 37-year history as an organization, Mario is the most tattooed individual who has ever worked there. Nancy, you know who he is, and he's just covered. His arms are, covered in tattoos, all sleeved out, as we say, down to his fingernails. Neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos. Forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say "the end." So apparently once he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt for anybody, I guess. And so I'm walking him through the airport, and I'd never been in public with him. And people see him, and they go, "Oh, my God." And mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely, and I go, wow, like if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow and walk up to anybody there and say, "Who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here?" they would take one beat, and then they'd say, "Mario." Yeah, Mario. Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. Mario is proof that the only non-delusional response to everything is kindness. So we get to Gonzaga, there's Big Talk Tuesday night. What they don't tell you is they would like you to speak to 95 classes beforehand. So we did, and I told them, "You guys get up, tell your stories. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom." And they got up, and they did a good job. Mario was a little nervous, but he did okay. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of either of their childhoods. So we get to the big venue with 1,000 people. And the two of them get up first, and they tell their stories, and they do a good job, though, again, Mario was quite nervous. Then I got up and did my thing, and then during the Q&A, I had them stand on either side of me. And, "Yes, ma'am," and a woman stands in this crowd of 1,000, and she goes, "Yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario." First question out the gate. And Mario steps up to the microphone. He's a tall, skinny drink of water, and he clutches the microphone with great intensity. And he says, "Yes." And he's just terrified. And she says, "Well, Mario, you say you're a father. You have a son and a daughter. They're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them?" Mario closes his eyes. He clutches the microphone with even greater intensity. He's trembling. He's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. When suddenly he blurts out, As soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone clutching, closed-eyed refuge. But he wants to get the entire sentence out. "I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me." And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. "Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you." And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And let there be no doubting it, everybody standing had been returned to themselves. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. And this beautiful church is not the place you've come to, it's the place you will go from. And you'll go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. You will go from here quickened to cling to the marrow of the gospel and to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. Only 4 things: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And you will go from here and you'll dismantle the barriers that exclude. And I think you're here tonight because you gave up a long time ago caring if anyone might accuse you of wasting your time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll just do a couple questions, and the hard ones I'll give to Jose. Raise your hand. They'll run up to you.
Hi, thank you so much. Considering the time we're at in this administration, have there been another layer of trauma coming to Homeboys regarding immigration issues in LA? Have they come at you? It seems like the industries would be an easy target.
Yeah, they haven't, in a sense, because that would really been be the third rail a little bit if ICE came to Homeboy, though we fear it every day. But a lot of the homies' parents are undocumented and they're street vendors. So we started a thing for several months now called Hope Alley. And we open up our side street and we have puestos. And all the parents and folks we know basically are undocumented relatives. The homies sell the food and such for the undocumented street vendors who are too frightened to come out of their homes. So it's a very lucrative thing for them, and it's only for 4 hours on a Friday. But people who support Homeboy and want to help and take a stand in terms of solidarity and support of our immigrant neighbors, they come out and they buy tacos and burritos and fruit and flowers, and they sell out. And one woman told me, I make more in the 4 hours at Homeboy than I do an entire week. And so it's a tiny step. But, people always say, I was in a conversation and 3 homies, and a homie said, well, what do we do next? And before I could answer, a homie said, love is always the next thing to do. And I thought, brilliant. And that's what it is. You just try to put one loving foot in front of the next, which is the best we can do in the face of what we're facing. And we're going to be victorious because we're joyful and loving. I was at a No Kings march in Boston. I happened to be in Boston. And there was a little girl had a sign that said, "Love will win." Which is kind of like St. Paul, who says that love never fails. I said that on a podcast, and a guy scoffed at me, and he said, "I'm afraid, Father, our listeners are going to think you're naive." And I go, "Well, name a time when love actually failed." I can't think of a time in history. I can think of times where we perhaps began it and stopped, or we didn't try it at all. But I can't think of a single time when love was anything less than victorious. And I believe that now as well. Maybe time for one more. There's one up here. There's two up here. There's one back there.
Hi, Father. I've heard you speak numerous times, and
I'm sorry.
could you relay the story about when former First Lady Laura Bush came to Homeboys and then invited you subsequently, a few weeks later, to visit her at the White House? That was a pretty remarkable story.
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't do stories on request exactly. But I do tell people to please read my books. And that story is so long that if told correctly, that we'd be here all night. So, but thank you. Please, that's a good ad for the books I've written. Next question is for Jose, no matter what it is. Ask about global economics. He's going to answer it.
Hey, Jose. First of all, I just want to applaud you. I think that you're a very brave and strong man. And congratulations on the person that you are.
Oh, that sounds great. God, it's so good.
My question was actually for both of you. It seems to me that both of you are firm believers that in interacting with others, somewhat becomes a mirror to yourself and finding out who you are. So my question is, Jose, for you, during your time in Homeboy Industries, what have you learned about yourself? And Father Boyle, in all of the lives that you've changed and the people that you've met, what has your time at Homeboy Industries taught you about yourself and your life? Thank you.
Well, for me, what I learned that I could be, I learned that I could be a caring, a caring person. I learned that I do have emotions and feelings, because before even coming to Homeboys, I wasn't the person I am today. Like, I was heartless, I was a cold-hearted person, and I didn't have feelings or emotions.
And let me just end with this. You know, I think we don't go to the margins to make a difference, because then it's about me, and it can't be about me. Like, I don't think I've ever changed a life. I know I work at a place where people are transformed. But you don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And then it's about us. And so you don't go to the margins to fix or save or rescue, because then you will be depleted. But if you go to the margins to delight in the people there, then it's eternally replenishing. You'll never run out of gas. You'll never burn out, because you're standing in the present moment and you're and you're curious about people. I'll just end with one story. We have Homeboy Silkscreen, which is celebrating 30 years this year. And it's, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homies and homegirls who have worked there over the 30 years. And they do high quality work, reasonably priced, in the UPS to Burlingame. I'm just saying. And so Ruben, who runs it with his wife, he called and said, he texted me and he said, I'm sending Gilbert to you. And I go, oh, this can't be good. And Gilbert's a homie I've known since he was a little mocosito in the projects, and he's a knucklehead, but a kid who carried a lot in his life. So Silkscreen's 20 minutes from us, and I see him walk through the front door. I flag him in, and he sits down. I said, what happened? And he said, well, supposedly I stole some T-shirts. And I said, did you? He goes, yes. Well, it wasn't exactly stealing, because there were 1,000 T-shirts, where they're printing T-shirts for a school or something. There were 1,000 T-shirts. I mean, I took 3 T-shirts. It wasn't exactly stealing. I go, oh, well, that's interesting. So let me see if I understand this correctly. I need a car. I want a car. I go to a car lot. There are 1,000 cars on the lot. I mean, come on, I take 1 car. It's not really stealing because there's 1,000 of them. And he looks at me and he says, exactly. And I think we may have exactly fallen out of our chairs. We laughed so damn hard. And so you move away from judgment and you lean into curiosity, and you stay delighting in the present moment no matter what. No matter what. And it's the thing that keeps your ministry vibrant, because it's not about you. It's about us. So how do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate? And how do we create a community of cherished belonging where people feel seen and cherished? Thank you all very much.
So as we leave, I just want to say on behalf of Our Lady of Angels, I just want to a special thanks to Father Greg and to Jose for tonight. His final comments about being cherished reminds us of his book, which I'm sure is available. And so a great thing for you. If anybody has a book with them tonight, one of his books, he's more than willing to sign them for you. So if you have a book tonight, just come up to him. I want to thank Father Greg. I want to thank our committee that brings together these beautiful events. We've had Lamar, we've had Mike Colopy, we've had Jen Norton, and tonight we've had Father Greg. If any of you people have a great suggestion about someone you've heard or something that would be beautifully moving for our community, please contact us, and that will help us to build our program for the coming year. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Thank you. Very good.